I come from the School of Education, so we always have to ask that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's K-12 experience, what can I tell you? My name is Mike Johanek, and I'm on the faculty of the Grad School of Ed and Associate Faculty in International Economic Education Development. And it's a great pleasure to have this panel, to moderate this panel. I only want to say a word or two by way of welcome, because this is a topic that I think we all have a great deal of interest in. I have a very vested interest. I'm actually now working on a MOOC. So I really want to want to make sure that the economists have figured out how this is all going to work out, how this is going to be sustainable, tell me what all these cost revenue pictures look like, everything else. I also was reminded of a story that I heard a few years ago, or about a year and a half ago. I was in a meeting with investors who were looking at these online activities. And there was an investor there saying that he had been early enamored of the idea of the freemium model. But he had not yet found he had understood the free part, but he had not yet seen the premium part get mixed into that model. So I'm sure our panel will help us understand. We'll understand all of that. We're very fortunate to have the kind of expertise and experience that we have this morning, and I'm grateful to them for coming in. Briefly by way of biography, Clara is the head of the partnerships team at Coursera, Consortium of MOOCs. Working with a group of partnership managers to oversee the relationships with over 100 university partners. A proud Quaker graduate, she did her undergraduate work here at Penn and completed her master's degree at University of Oxford in development studies. Professional background is in public health, business, and international development. Welcome. Michele Rimini, has been working in the Directorate for Education and Skills at OECD since 2012. He currently works on the Open Educational Resources Project. Prior to this, he contributed to SERI's Innovation Strategy for Education and Training, holds his macroeconomics master's macroeconomic policy from Barcelona Graduate School of Economics, as well as a master's in innovation economics from Bocconi University in Milan, I believe, yes. His research interests range from growth theory to innovation adoptions partners, and prior to joining the OECD, he worked in the private sector advising clients on business transformation and innovation. So you can see we have multiple sectors as well as parts of the world represented here. Finally, welcome Juliana Rockefeller Pia, an education specialist at International Finance Corporation, where she provides sector-specific knowledge to education transactions in emerging markets and to IFC's education strategy. She's also the lead collaborator with the World Bank's Education Department. Prior to joining IFC, Juliana worked at the World Bank, where she focused on policies that leverage private sector and assure quality in education systems. At the bank, she participated in the formulation of the World Bank Group Education Strategy 2020, Learning for All. She co-authored the book, The Role of Impact of Public-Private Partnerships in Education, and has conducted education policy reviews for the Philippines, Bulgaria, and Jordan. Juliana has a master's degree in international education policy from Harvard and a bachelor's in finance and international relations from La Universidad de Welcome to each of you. I'm going to try to be ruthless in keeping them to about 12 minutes so that we can then have ample time for discussion afterwards. Clara, thank you.
Sorry, there's just a line at the door, so we'll let people come in real quickly.
Walking in the intermission.
Hi everyone, and thanks Mike for the introduction. So just to caveat my presentation, I am not an economist by training. And so I think when we look at economics, there's, as I think Mike mentioned in his introduction, there's a presumption that we're talking about financial sustainability of MOOCs. But I want to have sort of a more liberal interpretation of economics, looking at the core, how people's behaviors and decisions are affected in a resource-constrained setting. So looking at from a cost-benefit perspective, who are the stakeholders that are mainly involved in MOOCs, and what are the costs that they incur in this involvement, as well as the benefits and the types of value that can be created through MOOCs. And so to present an initial framework, for those of you who may not be familiar, Coursera is a technology platform that allows for education at scale. So education of courses to tens or hundreds of thousands of students at a time. And we launched in April of 2012, and right now we have over 100 partners, mostly universities, but other educational institutions as well, who are providing the content, and offering over 600 courses to over 7 million students now. And so we see this as a two-sided marketplace, where Coursera is the intermediary that connects the universities or the content producers with the learners who are the content consumers. And ultimately, we want to fulfill the mission of working with universities and other educational institutions to provide really high-quality content to the world. And so to understand the economics of how this ecosystem works, then perhaps we can frame it as what are the costs to universities and to learners, and what is the value that they can get to offset these costs for each of these parties. So in terms of the cost to universities, to the content providers who are creating these the courses on our platform, primarily it's money and time. So these are mainly financial costs. The cost of course production, we hear from our university partners, has a median of about $50,000 US, though this number is widely ranging. On the low end, we hear numbers around $10,000, and on the higher end, upwards of $200,000. And this is not only for compensation of faculty and staff, but also for things like video equipment, video editing, getting copyright permissions for materials, things like that. And then faculty time is also really important. So the time not only of course production staff, but also of faculty members. When we did a survey of our instructors to ask about how much time did they spend preparing their books for the Coursera platform, the median was about 400 hours. This was also widely ranging, from the lower end of about 10 hours for instructors who weren't heavily involved, to upwards of a couple thousand hours, including one instructor who responded with, "All my life he's been preparing." So certainly it's definitely a non-trivial amount of resources that's invested by the universities. Now what about the cost to learners? For learners, these are mainly non-pecuniary costs because the courses, MOOCs, are by and large free. And that's a core part of our mission, to keep the MOOCs free to the extent possible. And so for the learners, the costs are mostly around opportunity cost. What is the opportunity cost of taking these courses? What is the time that's needed to invest to gain the knowledge and skills that's necessary to make the student a better person, or to gain a certain set of skills that can help them with better employment or professional development opportunities? And so on both sides, you see various types of costs. And when these costs become prohibitive, that's when the entire market breaks down. And so understanding how to develop a sustainable ecosystem for universities and learners requires an understanding of value creation. How can we create sufficient value to offset these costs? So now let's first look at the value creation for universities and then the value creation for learners. In order to create a sustainable ecosystem, this is where there's kind of a virtuous cycle of value that's generated by universities, creating value for learners that offset the costs of those learners, and vice versa, until the circle is complete. So for value creation for universities, we've just heard that the primary costs for universities are financial. And so let's focus on the financial side first. Now, when talking about the financing strategies of MOOCs, it's really important to keep in mind that the financial revenues that we bring to universities are ultimately very intimately tied to the value that we create for students. And at Coursera, we see ourselves providing two types of value for students. The first is the education, the learning. So what are the skills that you get from the courses that you take? And we provide that for free because that's our mission. The second is where the revenues come in. So the second is around credentials. Beyond just learning the basic skills and principles from the courses, we want to target lifelong learning and continuing adult education. And we, especially for students that already have a degree, we see credentials as a way to help students upgrade their skills for better employment opportunities. So now linking the puzzle piece of financial revenues that is the blocker for universities to the credentials, that is the value for students, that's where our business model comes from. The main product that we have that's revenue generating right now is the Identity Verified Certificate that is offered on our Signature Track product. Now, the Verified Certificate is essentially where we verify the identity of the student. The student, by signing up for Signature Track, they can take a webcam photo of themselves and of their photo ID every time they have an assessment to submit for the course. In addition, we ask them to type out a particular sentence every time they have to submit an assessment, and we use a biometric pattern test to make sure that the typing pattern is the same across multiple assessments to make sure that this is the same person taking that course. And so the Signature Track product, the Verified Certificate, costs between $30 and $100 per course. In addition, because of our mission to provide free education and to make sure that we don't disadvantage anyone who is unable to pay, a significant aspect of this product is financial aid. So any student who is unable to pay can apply for financial aid and essentially get Signature Track for free. And so when it comes to, this is the credential value that is created for students that generates revenue for universities. And so far, the Signature Track product has been fairly successful. In terms of our conversion rates, we launched the Signature Track product in January of last year. And from April of last year to April of this year, we saw a bump in the conversion from about 1.2% conversion to 2.4%, meaning nowadays for the courses that are offered on Signature Track, about 2.4% of all students enrolled in the course join Signature Track, and about 15% of all of those students apply for financial aid. And we see this bump as being driven by two factors primarily. First of all, in the adult continuing education sector, we see that employers are increasingly recognizing the value of these verified certificates. And secondly, we're also changing the user interface and improving it to optimize the website and increase user conversion that way. And so from a revenue standpoint for our company, we launched in January 2013 the Signature Track product. After 9 months, we hit our first $1 million. We took another 3 months to double that to $2 billion, and then another 2 months to double that to $4 million. So this is a very optimistic trend, and we don't really expect for it to double every couple of months. But certainly it shows promise for an emerging freemium model. Now, related to Signature Track is our specializations product, which is essentially a sequence of courses. So taking courses that are linked together by a particular topic and putting them together so that students can take a series of related courses and complete a capstone project at the end. The value of this is that employers recognize that the student not just created or completed a single course, but completed a series of courses that represents a significant unit of learning. So for example, we have two of our partners, Maryland and Vanderbilt University, working together to co-create the specialization on Android programming. This is a 3-course series followed by a capstone project where students apply the principles that they learned to actually create an application on the Android handheld phones. And so we see this as having a significant influence, a positive influence on Signature Track. Because while single classes create a valuable credential, we see specializations as increasing the value of that credential. And so taking a step back, so far we've been talking a lot about the financial aspects, but our university partners joined this partnership not just to amortize their costs. And so importantly, while the business model speaks to financial sustainability, it's important to also look at the different aspects of value beyond the finances that universities and students get out of this. So just as a quick example, from Wesleyan University, we had the social psychology course where the instructor, Scott Plouse, designed a project where for the final project, students had to live compassionately for 24 hours, and this was called the Day of Compassion Project. And as a result of this project, over 700 students received perfect marks on the peer assessment after writing up what they did during those 24 hours, applying the principles of social psychology to their experiences. And the students voted on these 700 projects, and the person who emerged as the grand prize winner was Balesh Jindal, a physician from India, For her 24 hours, for her day of compassion, she decided to go to a girls' school where most of the students were economically disadvantaged, and decided to teach them about sexual violence, about what it means, what is inappropriate touching, what does sexual abuse and sexual violence means. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, she uncovered many stories of abuse that previously the girls did not know about. And so as a result of that, she is giving pro bono counseling to these girls and to their mothers. So this is a type of value that is non-financial, but it shows Wesleyan as a leader in social impact through the creation of MOOCs. And so this is another type of value creation. Now, how about the value for learners? Well, for learners, it's important to understand the demographics. 2/3 of our learners come from outside the US, with 1/3 from emerging economies. And if you look at the growth of our users, for all major countries, the growth of user base is greater than the user growth in the US, quarter to quarter from January of 2013 up until this year, or this quarter. So what does this mean? For learners, they're faced with costs ranging from mostly opportunity costs. So how do they access the course? What is relevant material for them that is accessible? And so a couple of things just to quickly wrap up on this. Translations is a huge part of our priorities for localizing the material. So translating the user interface so that users of different languages can access the material that's relevant for them. We are working with global translation partners to also translate video subtitles. So for example, in one course in MathThink, Brazilian enrollments increased by a factor of 3 times once Portuguese subtitles were made available. And I think I'm just about out of time. But just to wrap up on the value that students get, mobile access is also really important, especially when we're talking about students from emerging economies. So we've launched an iOS app, an iPad app, as well as an Android app that allows for students who don't have easy access to laptops to access Coursera content. And lastly, around the value that's created for learners, importantly, social learning and community building to overcome the costs of let's say education that's otherwise very difficult to attain. So we've set up various community centers, U.S. embassies, libraries that are working to create content or to teach the content in facilitated centers that have internet access. So the last slide, just putting all of this together, what this means is that by understanding the costs and the value that's generated for both universities and learners, we can create an ecosystem that is sustainable and that would allow for sustainable MOOC creation and education at scale. Thank you.
Everybody. I'm really thankful to the organizer of the conference for allowing me to be here. My name is Michele Rimini. I work at the UCD and at the Center for Educational Research and Innovation, which is one of the most unseen body of the UCD that deals with education since 1968, and is considered as the research branch of the Director of Education and Skills. Before going into the discussion on the MOOCs, I would like to spend a few words about the work of the OECD on development issues and how the work of the OECD can have an impact on the development agenda.
A little louder.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
The OECD is a network of countries that share together the principle of market economy and democracy. And it has been mainly, since its foundation in 1961, has been mainly dealt with issues such as economic analysis, trade and investment policies, and agricultural policies. And in the recent years has been trying to reach out to a wider audience of countries, firstly by increasing the number of member countries, and secondly by establishing collaboration with the newcomers, the BRICS the new economies that are providing the new geography of growth, such as Brazil, India, Indonesia, and China. And at the same time, the OECD has worked a lot extensively with the aid agency by monitoring the aid efforts that every single OECD member country is providing to developing countries, as well as understand why, what are the effective models to provide aid to developing countries. Indeed, the OECD ambition is to become a global inclusive policy network where countries come together and decide to reflect upon the common challenges and try to find solutions to the common problems. In that sense, another pillar which has been broadly brought about by the OECD in the last years is the OECD Strategy for Development, which doesn't really aims at replacing the work of other international organizations that have more strength in developing issues, but rather to leverage on its own competencies in providing evidence-based policy. In this sense, the OECD has contributed to the post-2015 development goal agenda, and it indeed tried to provide its own expertise by leveraging on the capability of providing evidence-based policy and provide instruments for measuring the goals that we would want to set up through the post-2015 agenda. In this sense, a very important aspect that we've been trying to work recently that we contribute to developing agenda is that the initiative is also called PISA for Development, which aims at developing a universal method for measuring educational success. The idea that we will adapt what is the current PISA study, which basically measures the student's outcome at 15 years old, to the context of developing countries by adapting the econometric model that defines the results, because measuring a student outcome in the US is different than measuring the learning outcome in Ecuador or in Sri Lanka. And at the same time, we'll try to adapt the contextual questionnaires that are part of the PISA study to the context of developing countries. The first results of the PISA for Development study will be published in 2018, and we have already a bit of countries which have been really participating in signing agreement with this study. I will mention Cambodia, Ecuador, Guatemala, Senegal, Sri Lanka, Zambia, and at the same time Tanzania and Rwanda are about to join us for the first round of the PISA development study. Lastly, because SERI also deals with innovation and UCD also deals extensively with innovation, there is another strand of work that deals with the knowledge for inclusive innovation and development. In other words, it's trying to understand how exactly innovation influences inequality and development, and it focuses especially in industrial, social, and territorial inequalities. Another interesting aspect of this initiative, which is, I think, very related to the conference MOOCs for Development, is the fact that this project also I aim to understand what are the peculiarities of so-called inclusive innovation, those innovations that are really targeted to the bottom of the pyramid, and how these innovations that are targeted to the bottom of the pyramid can be scaled up, with a special regard to education. The question is again, are MOOCs an inclusive innovation in education? Well, it would be interesting. I'll now go back to the real topic of this conference, which is MOOCs and open education, and I briefly highlight what are the main findings of OECD areas of activities in this field. The Center for Educational Research and Innovation have been extensively dealt with open educational resources, and since 2007 we published one of the first and most important publication on open educational resources, which was called Giving Knowledge for Free. The idea that with open educational resources we'll be able to give access to a vast amount of resources to everyone. After this publication, we have been working following the implementation of the Paris 2012 declaration on OER. We have been trying to investigate what was our policymakers' idea with regards to the benefits of OER. And currently, we just started a new project in the beginning of 2014, which aims at understanding what is the evidence sustaining the proclaimed benefits around the open educational resources, which in practically this project tries to understand whether in fact OER, for example, can provide a cheaper and more effective alternative for education provision. At the same time, we're trying to see whether is it true that OER do actually provide access to previously excluded people and students, and at the same time we're trying to understand whether OER does actually improve the quality of education and also improve the quality of teaching and provide new forms for advanced learning. In the future, we will deal more extensively with MOOCs and OER, and we will try to seek out how OER and MOOCs can be applied to in higher education. Here I just showed the definition of OER and MOOCs. I think it's interesting thing to see that here I took the Hewlett Foundation definition of OER, which I think it's the most clear in defining exactly what OER are, and as opposed to the MOOCs, which is really new, so there's no clear agreement on what MOOCs are, and especially there's not really agreement on the fact that all the MOOCs are massive and open, so it's not really clear about that. Indeed, there are some similarities, but of course many differences. The main difference is, indeed, the first difference that I think is very relevant is the licensing regime of OER and MOOCs. Usually OER have an open license, which allows them to revise and easily distribute, so to modify its releases, whereas MOOCs entail usually copyrighted materials. OER can be anything from learning units to full courses, and MOOCs usually are full courses. And OER, I would say that are mainly for teachers because their granularity allows them to be remixed and repurposed into different learning settings, whereas for MOOCs are mainly for students. Also, the other way would be true in the sense that we could also have an OER like the Khan Academy, which will be completely for students, and some MOOCs that are actually used for professional training of the teachers. So this is a bit tricky as a distinction. Indeed, both resources share high initial development costs that need to be remunerated somehow. And in this sense, this is where I get back to the discussion of the topic, which is a comparison between the business model that are available for open educational resources and for MOOCs. I'll go briefly through the most common envisaged business model of OER and then see how they can be applied to MOOCs. So, the first business model that we'll look at is the business model of donation, where there are private and public entities that provide sponsor funding for the initiation of initiatives related to open education, such as whether those are in OER or MOOCs. In OER, this is particularly relevant. The contribution of foundations such as the Hewlett Foundation, the Rimini and Shuttleworth, and at the same time the US government had granted $4 billion for the production of initial OER. And at the same time, also MOOCs have received the public funding, especially in Europe. We have the experience of the France Université Numérique, which is an initiative that is sponsored by the French Ministry of Education, and as well the iVersity platform, which is a German initiative which is being sponsored again by both the German government and foundations in Germany. The overarching question about this business model is whether or not this could be applied to the context of developing countries, and I believe that this is indeed something which could definitely apply. I think that aid agency will totally go in financing pro bono MOOC in a country that's safe. The second business model I would like to talk about is the institutional enlargement, which comes out by the fact that existing higher education institution try to enlarge their service offering by providing online materials. The first example of this was back in 2002 by MIT with the Open Courseware Consortium, and this was a platform, an OER platform, that managed to create additional interest into MIT. And some studies have actually demonstrated that there have been people who have, after having followed the Open Courseware Consortium, have been able to enroll to the MIT. And of course, there is the MIT and Harvard, which have been racing to participate into the MOOCs platform, and so on and so forth. This also, I think, is a business model that could completely work in developing countries. We just have seen today with the African Virtual University platform. Just before. We have then the freemium model, which has been just described by Clara. I will not go too deep in that, but I will just mention that it seems to work in a sense that both MOOCs platform and OER platforms seem to work very well with this business model. The only thing is that, of course, it requires a substantial number of users to be used in the system. You need to have a substantial number of users. Lastly, that's the second last one, is the business model of advertising, and of course the idea is to put an ad to the MOOC or to the OER platform, but also to generate targeted advertising and getting revenues for personal data. The idea that we collect user surfing behavior, and by that we will be able to target the personal ads that will follow the user interest, and that's the same idea that works with Google, and that works in that sense. And indeed, there is this problem, this possibility of use the data generated by the OER, the MOOCs platform, to extract in value, monetize the value that can be extracted by personal data. We have evidence from the OECD shows that we can get as far from $1 to $30 by selling personal information by open market to sell that. Lastly, the last model is the use of OER and MOOCs for professional training. In that sense, you have the online courses that are licensed to organizations for the professional training needs. This is particularly effective in the field of MOOCs because you can actually sell the entire package to the companies, and it's a very big market. It's 150 billion apparently, and indeed it's slightly more difficult with OER because you don't really know how to sell the entire package. Indeed, it goes back to the issue of licensing regime. With OER, you have open license, you don't really know what's happening with that, whereas with MOOC, the license is clear, you have to pay for the copyright. So that's considered a clear way to generate money out of professional training. At the time being, I'm not really sure that would be working in developing countries. I think that's my contribution.
Looks great. Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe I can get started, sorry.
Or-
I can start with the caveats of my presentation. Here you go. Okay, great. So thanks for your patience. I hope that you don't take that out of my 10 minutes. So my name is Juliana Rockefeller. As I said, I work for the IFC, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. So for those who don't know that, I guess a couple, a 2-minute introduction or 1-minute introduction of what IFC does, which is a less well-known part of the World Bank Group. It was founded, about 10 years later after the World Bank had been created with the goal of supporting private sector growth in emerging markets as part of the whole development agenda. And the main objective of the World Bank Group is really help these private entities to generate jobs, tax revenue, and develop local economies. So we are the counterpart of the World Bank through the private sector. And the education practice started much later than that, in the late 90s, with the goal of also supporting the role of government, who's main financier and regulator of education. But we've seen huge growth of private institutions, both at the primary level and the tertiary level, that take up a lot of students, either by default or by design. And we felt that, I guess the institution felt that was a piece of the equation worth supporting. And that's what IFC does. It's a much smaller practice in the World Bank Group, but we work together trying to countries that want to engage the private sector to meet the broader development goals. So having said that, I will go through, one slide about the goals and strategic direction of the World Bank. The strategy, the 10-year strategy of the World Bank Group in education is really to support learning for all. And the way the World Bank does that is by adopting a systems approach and viewing education not as isolated interventions here and there, but rather adopting a systemic approach that would allow for smart approaches that are equitable and that lead to outcomes, to learning outcomes. So it moves the emphasis on getting kids into the schools, but rather to making sure that when they go into schools, they learn. And within this broader goals, IFC seeks 2 main priorities. One is to really support skills and enhance employability. A great proportion of what we do is in tertiary education, and that's partly because governments, the role of the private universities and technical centers is a lot more present at that level than at the basic level, where governments spend a lot more resources on making sure kids go to school with this MDGs and universal education. So we found a lot more work at the tertiary level. And that's why our main emphasis is really on creating skills that lead to employment, and also to help scale up these institutions through sustainable business models. And that's why IFC calls itself a double bottom line institution that looks to support both type of goals: the financial sustainability of an institution and its scale at affordable prices, and also to make sure that the education that's imparted is leading to skills and employability. So that takes care of the whole great piece, and then that explains that about 50% of what we do in education is in Latin America, because it turns out Latin American governments are a lot more open to private sector participation, especially at the tertiary level, and also that 80% of our portfolio is in tertiary institutions. And the other 20% is on student lending schemes and K-12 education. 2 years ago, IFC went through a strategic revision of priorities, and MOOCs were happening at the same time, and the role of technologies were really buzzing word everywhere. And then there was a lot of discussion about who within the institution could really attend this growing sector beyond the research and observing it. And we felt that it was because it's mainly driven by a private sector, the space, it was really up to IFC to adopt a more active role in innovation beyond just the brick and mortar traditional scalable tertiary institutions, but really be an active player in the space as well. And so that's how, full disclosure, we're investors in Coursera in the last round. We started doing a few investments that would help us tackle these 2 main goals that we face. And I guess these two slides really summarize what everybody in this room knows already. The two big challenges that everybody in development and education is trying to tackle. One is of access, and access I want to emphasize in the tertiary level because there's been a lot of progress in achieving universal primary education. There's still about 9% of kids out of school, and there's a huge learning gap, which is really the problem that is illustrated on the left-hand side or your right-hand side graph about PISA, but I'll get there in a minute. But really about the problem of closing the access gap at early childhood, which is not something IFC does, but it's huge, and that's where our colleagues at the bank are mainly largely focused. And tertiary education, where on average 30% of students go to universities, and it's extremely diverse across regions and also very low compared to OECD countries. And on the other hand, the quality gap. And it's expressed in two main ways. When we have measures, and I'm really glad about PISA for development to have better metrics for low-income countries, but in the PISA outcomes we have, you see the bottom countries are all emerging markets, with a few exceptions like Vietnam, who for the first time participated ranked at the top, but really most developing countries rank at the bottom. And the colored ones are Latin America, because that's the region I was looking at some point when preparing the slides. And the other one is the mismatch between supply and demand for skills. So even when students finish the education cycle, there's a ton of studies and surveys that report that employers struggle to find the skills they need in the available pool of candidates. So this really gets perpetuated over time, and that's the main challenge we face. So in education innovations, once IFC 2 years ago decided to broaden its scope to not just supporting the scalable private institutions, and that we wanted to participate in also supporting innovations in a space that really struggles to innovate, we came across MOOCs area, and what I will present from here onwards in a way overlaps with what Michele already said about business models, but it really just represents how we see the space. And I don't in any way pretend to be, fully comprehensive of the space, A, because it's a constant moving target, it continues to evolve every day, and secondly, because there may be more initiatives that what I captured here, but we see three main organizational models. The first one is about private and for-profit institutions, which are those that generally startups, spin-offs of larger universities, and that are mainly funded by investors, venture capital, private equity, or strategic investors. And examples of that is Coursera, that's why we're able to invest in them, but others like Udemy and Viduka in Brazil. Iversity, I thought it was supported by investors, but I think it's also government funded, so it could be in both buckets. Number two is University Consortium, those like sponsored by MIT, Harvard, such as edX, that also covers another 12 universities and Future Learn in the UK. And government sponsor, which is the France Université Numérique effort, and in some extent Iversity. So this is how we saw the space when we started looking at it. And then for us to think through rationale for investment, we could come up with 10 main lines of business models that could really help explain how will these models become sustainable over time. So the one that's mostly being talked about and used, and the one that has actually generated revenue so far, are in the business to consumer space. So essentially, and very simply, when there's a fee for that students pay for having for taking a course, and that is the model, for example, Udemy adopts, which is the marketplace that students can pay a small fee. Well, the ranges between, I believe, $90 and $500, but you can correct me later.
Between 9 and, the price is set by instructors.
Right.
So we don't set the price.
There's a marketplace, but essentially when the course is paid for by the student. And the second one is Coursera's model or Viduka's model, when the student acquires education for free, but then would pay, if interested, for certificate of completion. And I believe these two are the ones that really have generated thus far the large proportion of revenues that MOOC platforms have been able to to produce. Now, on the business-to-business side, there are other possible models. That is, when universities, not in the MOOC platform necessarily, pay licensing fees for private instance of the platform and for courses to deliver in an internal group. So by that, what I mean, so these are all, by the way, not necessarily existing, but theoretical, but there has been talk about it. So when a university is interested in adopting some of these existing MOOC courses, integrating them into the regular offerings, and pay a licensing fee to have a separate private instance that would better meet the needs of the teacher and of the students at a specific time for a specific reason within a program. So the second one is for data analytics, really for content partners and other partners that want to really track down how students are interacting and using the platform. The fifth one and third one in this category is for advisory services, really for universities that want to take their academic programs to an online version. And I mean, it's arguable to what extent these are MOOCs as well, but there's a business around this type of services to schools to take their programs online. When university pay the MOOC provider for a per student fee for them to deliver a core subject, so Economics 101, instead of being delivered at the university, is the responsibility of the MOOC provider, online or blended model. And I see I have a minute. So there's others about employers. The last two are about employers. Basically use them for corporate training and professional development, or for recruiters, and this may be, there might be private concerns, but also to what extent the employers are able to identify promising candidates that have taken the courses online. There's ways around it. And finally, there's a philanthropic model. It's just, there's no business model. It's just being funded as an NGO. And a 1 minute slide about our specific, so that's how we see the space. How do we, as an institution, thought about MOOCs the day we decided to support one of them? And that is, the first one is, we didn't think it was a silver bullet that would automatically address the very large and significant long-standing problems in education. But it could be an alternative. It could be part of the solution, especially in a space that struggles to innovate for a very long time. So we thought it was important to have a participation. Also, the second reason was these platforms already, since the beginning, have a very significant footprint in emerging markets. So in our view, it's really not a third of the students from emerging markets. It's more close to 40% with some seasonality. If you understand that in this measurement of Europe, there are some countries that are still clients of the World Bank in Eastern Europe. So it really got close to 40% when we were looking at this. It has a potential